I've seen a lot of darkness in my life, the absolute bottom of crime and human nature. But no darkness was as intense, as dominant as this black on a garage floor. I'm Mark Hensley, 33 years with the Michigan Homicide Division. That was my whole life. I'm retired, but some files, the smell of some crimes breaks through even the retirement seal. That odor never, ever leaves you. It was that bone-chilling, cold November morning in 2019. A missing person alert came through my radio. Chuck Gordon. At first, I thought it was a routine domestic issue, a simple runaway. Then I arrived at the garage where Chuck was last seen. I opened the heavy metallic door with a creak, and that's when the alarms went off inside me. A sharp, suffocating smell of paint hit my nose. The floor had been painted with an industrial fresh black. It was a black so deep, so opaque, so hastily applied that it seemed like a killer had barely dropped the brush and fled. A garage shouldn't be this clean. A mechanic doesn't paint his workspace such an aggressive black. This floor should have lived with stains and oil marks. But it was flawless. That flawlessness was concealing an ugly truth. A cold sweat dripped down my back. This black was acting as a cover. The sin committed by someone was still clawing its way out from beneath that thick layer of paint. The missing man was Chuck Gordon. We found his car in a freezing corner of Detroit's Corktown area. The cold was so intense that the layer of ice on the car proved it had been standing there for at least one night. I meticulously inspected the interior. No fight. No struggle. But something was missing. And that absence changed the entire direction of the file. Chuck Gordon's heavy winter coat was left in the car. A man doesn't wander around in the Michigan cold without a coat. He doesn't abandon his car with his coat inside. This was an illogical departure. The coat being left behind indicated that Chuck was removed forcibly and hastily, or that he wasn't given a chance to retrieve it. This small detail was a signature for me. This file was no longer a missing person case, but a case of elimination hiding a great secret. Chuck's last known location was that black garage. The owner was Travis Oakwood, a former motocross legend. When I interrogated Travis, I found exactly what I was looking for right in front of me, an excessive calmness covering the truth. It was not the peace of innocence, but the icy control that comes with the burden of knowing a great secret and refusing to tell it. Travis claimed he had painted the floor a few weeks ago for aesthetic concerns. But as a detective, I follow body language and, most importantly, physical evidence. I went back into the garage a second time. I knelt down. I put my palm close to that cursed black floor, which was still warm despite the freezing cold outside. A concrete floor cannot be this warm in November. This was thermal proof that the paint must have been applied very recently, likely during the cleanup and concealment act immediately after a crime. This was a murder scene, and Travis had tried to bury the truth in a tar-like black. The technology of 2019 whispered words that the killer would not speak. We analyzed the security camera footage near the garage. There was a brief blackout between 11:02 p.m. and 11:07 p.m. Not a power failure, not a random glitch. 5 minutes of deliberate blinding. Someone didn't want the camera to see that moment. Chuck's phone completed this timeline. It was known he arrived at the garage and stayed inside for approximately 27 minutes. Then, precisely at 11:19 p.m., the signal from his phone cut out. Eternal silence. Blackout. 11:02. Paint. Missing coat. Phone shut down. 11:19. Everything was squeezed into that short 27-minute window. How does a person completely vanish within 27 minutes? While the evidence itself was silent, the voids and inconsistencies in the timeline were screaming the entire story. Digging up the garage, stripping the paint, was impossible. The evidence was concealed too professionally, with almost surgical care. Even chemical solvents could not penetrate that layered black paint. This was not an ordinary cover-up. This indicated planning. But there is no such thing as flawlessness, especially in crime. My eye caught the millimeter-level differences on the floor. The concrete surface beneath the paint was slightly higher or lower in some places than others. A mechanic wouldn't do his floor that sloppily. This unevenness was a byproduct of that rushed painting job. That surface was locking the secret underneath, but that secret was trying to surface with that millimeter-level height difference. The 27 minutes Chuck spent inside. What happened in those 27 minutes? I returned to the garage again. This time I examined the floor at a microscopic level. Details missed by others. Tiny microbubbles, a fine roughness beneath the paint, a minimal depression. These were traces so minimal that only a detective who had spent years on this job could notice them. These roughnesses and depressions were the trace of a physical action, more than a physical remnant. A story lay beneath the paint, a struggle, a fight, maybe a death. Months of waiting. Nature finally worked in our favor. The cold air and the moisture beneath the paint, combined with a chemical reaction, caused a tiny crack to form in the corner of the garage, visible only with a magnifying glass. This was what solved the entire file. What seeped out of this crack wasn't blood, but it was a microscopic trace of a chemical reaction that accumulated under the paint, confirming the hasty cleanup. There is no perfect cleanup. There is only a more careful crime. And that crack, that tiny flaw in the black surface's perfection, gave away the carelessness. Crime, no matter how professionally concealed, always leaves a trace. As the file progressed, Travis's behavior turned into a classic psychological manifestation of a culprit. The man spent an abnormally large amount of time in the garage. He left the lights on at night, and he was constantly, obsessively cleaning the front of the garage. It was as if he was waiting for someone to return, someone to approve of his work. There was no body, no blood, nothing concrete remained. Just a black floor and a silent story beneath it. But a detective's job is solved not by evidence, but by the voids and behaviors. Travis's obsession around the grave he created for himself was the proof of murder for me. Months passed. The snow melted, the air warmed up. As the temperature increased, the paint on the surface expanded, and the microbubbles grew. And the chemical analysis taken from that crack confirmed what we suspected. Beneath the paint, we found a residue that I was used to seeing in automotive workshops for years, but which could not be explained in this concentration: microcrystallized oil particles. This was oil that appears upon human skin contact, the kind that seeps into the floor during a struggle, not an ordinary contact. This was the first and undeniable scientific trace that Chuck had been murdered. It was covered with paint. They couldn't wipe it away. The truth had seeped out from under the black. Travis had used the garage not as a grave, but as a stage where he tried to erase the crime. The body was still not found. But sometimes it is not the body that proves the truth. What brings justice is behavior. It is the haste itself. It is the way the crack formed. It is that minimal roughness beneath the paint. I will never know exactly how Chuck died, but I know what happened. The garage tried to hide the truth from me with that jet black paint. But darkness cannot keep any secret forever. Even darkness eventually cracks. And that crack screamed that a man had been murdered, that a garage had concealed it, and that a culprit was silently clasping his hands together. I'm Mark Hensley. This file may never close, But sometimes justice does not come by finding a body. Sometimes justice comes by the truth seeping out from under the black. And in this story, the only thing that spoke the truth was that black floor.